I never expected to hear my wife whisper another man's name while lying beside me in our bed. But that night, everything changed. What if betrayal wasn't the end, but the beginning of my most calculated revenge? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable story of betrayal, deception, and ultimate revenge, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping real-life tales like this one. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I read every single one. Now let's begin. In that moment, something inside me snapped. What if a betrayal so deep turned into an act of revenge so calculated that it left the betrayer without a single word to say? What happens when the tables turn and the cheater becomes the one who is blindsided? Before we dive into this unforgettable story, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more captivating real-life betrayals. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Now, let's get into the story, because this isn't just an affair. It's a game where the ultimate winner is yet to be decided. The night air was thick with silence, the kind that only deep betrayal could bring. Jason lay still in bed, his breath steady, his body unmoving, but his mind was racing. He could hear the muffled whispers of his wife, Emily, just a few feet away, her back turned to him as she clutched her phone under the cover. Here. Yeah, baby. I miss you too. Jason felt his chest tighten. The words weren't meant for him. It was a dagger to his heart, a confirmation of every suspicion that had been gnawing at the edges of his mind for weeks now. Emily giggled, her voice light, flirtatious, an echo of the woman Jason had fallen in love with years ago, except now that laughter wasn't his to enjoy. He clenched his jaw, willing himself to stay calm, to breathe. His wife was cheating on him. The reality of it settled over him like a crushing weight, but he refused to react. Not yet. Instead, he listened. Tomorrow? I don't know. Jason's been a little suspicious lately. He asked me where I was last night. She paused, biting her lip. No, don't worry. I covered it up. He's too trusting. Too trusting? Jason swallowed the bitter laugh threatening to rise in his throat. She had no idea that trust had died the second she started acting differently. The late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the guarded way she held her phone like it was a lifeline. He should have known sooner. But love makes fools of us all. Emily sighed softly, shifting in bed. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. Same place? Jason committed every word to memory. Same place. He would find out exactly where that was. She ended the call, rolling over, her body pressing against his like she hadn't just finished whispering sweet lies into another man's ear. Jason forced himself to remain still, to keep his breathing slow and even. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. He needed proof. The next morning, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed Jason on the cheek before heading into the shower, humming a tune as if she weren't carrying the weight of betrayal on her shoulders. Jason, however, felt it. He felt the invisible scars she was carving into their marriage with every lie, every deception. At breakfast, he watched her. Emily scrolled through her phone with a lazy smile, pausing occasionally to type a response. Anything interesting? Jason asked casually, taking a sip of his coffee. She barely looked up. Just some work emails. He nodded, playing along. You're going in today? She hesitated for half a second. It was barely noticeable, but Jason caught it. Yeah, I have a client meeting around noon. Shouldn't be too long, though. Another lie. Jason had checked her work schedule. No meetings. But he simply smiled and kissed the top of her head. Have a great day, babe. Emily beamed at him, her eyes sparkling with the ease of someone who thought they had complete control over the truth. As soon as she left, Jason's expression hardened. He had never been a man driven by revenge, but this This was different. Love had blinded him before, but now he saw everything clearly. It was time to play the game, and he was going to win. That afternoon, Jason took an early lunch break from work. He parked his car a few blocks away from Emily's supposed meeting spot, pulling out his phone and opening a GPS tracker app. Last night, while she had been in the shower, he had slipped a small tracking device into her purse, something she wouldn't notice amidst the chaos of her day. The dot on the map wasn't heading toward her office. Instead, it was leading him to a hotel. Jason's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He felt the sting of betrayal all over again, but he refused to let emotion cloud his judgment. He had to be smart about this. Parking his car across the street from the hotel, he waited. 10 minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up, and from the passenger seat, Emily stepped out, dressed in a form-fitting dress she hadn't worn for him in years. She was smiling. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of confidence Jason didn't recognize, exited the driver's side, walking around to meet her. Emily's face lit up as she wrapped her arms around him, pulling him in for a kiss. Jason felt like he had been punched in the gut, but he didn't move. He simply raised his phone and snapped the picture. His wife was cheating on him, and now he had proof. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she was in control. But Jason had a plan. And when he was finished, Emily wouldn't just lose her secret lover. She would lose everything. Would you like me to continue with the next part of the story? Jason sat in his car, his grip tightening around the steering wheel, knuckles turning white as he watched his wife disappear into the hotel lobby with her lover. His breath was slow, controlled. Because if he let go, if he allowed himself to feel the full weight of this moment, he wasn't sure what he would do. Anger boiled beneath his skin, but it wasn't the reckless kind that urged a man to storm inside and confront his wife on the spot. No, Jason wasn't a fool. He knew there was a way to make this hurt more, a way to ensure that when Emily finally realized the cost of her betrayal, she would be left standing in the ashes of everything she had destroyed. He glanced down at the photo he had just taken on his phone. Emily's body pressed close to that man's. Her lips curved into a smile Jason hadn't seen in years. She was happy, happier than she had been with him in a long time. That realization stung, but he wouldn't let it break him. Not yet. Jason pulled out of his parking spot and drove away, his mind already working through the steps he needed to take. He had always been a patient man, a meticulous planner, and if Emily thought she could lie to him, betray him, and walk away without consequences, she had underestimated the man she had married. By the time he got home, the anger had settled into something sharper, something more dangerous, calculated vengeance. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wedding photo still hanging on the wall. Emily in white, glowing with love, her hand resting in his, her eyes full of promises she had since broken. Jason had never been the type to believe in fairy tales, but he had believed in her. And now, that belief had been shattered. He wasn't going to be the pathetic husband begging for an explanation. He was going to be the man who took everything she thought she had under control and ripped it out from beneath her. That night, Emily came home at her usual time, her hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick freshly reapplied. Jason sat on the couch, flipping through channels, pretending not to notice the way she hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "Hey, babe," she greeted, dropping her purse on the counter like nothing had happened. "How was your day?" Jason forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Same as always. What about you? How was the meeting?" Emily didn't miss a beat. "Exhausting. We went over contracts for hours. You know how it is." Lies. But Jason nodded as if he believed her. "Sounds rough. You hungry?" She waved him off. "No, I grabbed something on the way home. Just gonna shower and head to bed." Of course. Emily had perfected the routine. She always showered after seeing him, washed away the scent of another man, scrubbed away the evidence of her betrayal, before slipping into their bed like she was still the loving wife she pretended to be. Jason waited until she disappeared into the bathroom before he stood and walked to the counter where her purse sat. With careful precision, he retrieved her phone. He had installed tracking software earlier that week, but tonight he wanted more. Unlocking it with the password he had memorized long ago, he went straight to her messages. Mark, can't wait to see you again. Today was incredible. Emily, I miss you already. Same time next week? Jason's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to keep reading. Mark, of course, but I hate sneaking around like this. When are you finally gonna leave him? Jason's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. Would she really leave him for this guy? His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled up, looking for her response. Emily, I just need a little more time. It's complicated. Jason exhaled slowly. So she wasn't planning on telling him, not yet at least. That was good, it gave him time. Time to make sure that when she finally did, she would regret ever thinking about walking away from him. Jason locked her phone and placed it exactly where he had found it, slipping back onto the couch just as the shower turned off. She emerged a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp, her skin flushed. Jason barely looked at her. Heading to bed? She asked, stretching like she hadn't just spent the afternoon tangled in another man's sheet. In a bit, he replied, keeping his eyes on the TV. Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding and heading into their bedroom. As soon as she was out of sight, Jason pulled out his laptop. It was time to put his plan into motion. First, he compiled everything he had: text messages, photos, GPS tracking logs. Then he sent an anonymous email to Mark's workplace with a few choice images attached. Just a little something to shake things up. Next, he set up a meeting with a divorce attorney. Emily might think she had time, but Jason was about to take that away from her. She had spent months lying to him, deceiving him. Now, it was his turn to control the narrative. The next few days passed like a perfectly orchestrated play. Emily continued her charade, smiling at him in the mornings, kissing him before work, pretending to be the devoted wife she no longer was. Jason played along, but underneath it all, the pieces were already shifting. Then, the first domino fell. Mark lost his job. Emily came home furious, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Jason, you will not believe what happened today, she fumed, throwing her purse down. Mark got fired just like that. No warning, nothing? Jason raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. Mark? Your coworker? Emily faltered for just a second. Yeah, he mentioned it once or twice. Losing a job is tough, Jason said casually. Hope he lands on his feet. Emily pursed her lips, eyes scanning his face like she was looking for something, any sign that he knew more than he was letting on. But Jason had spent years being a loving, trusting husband. She never suspected that he had become something else entirely. A few days later, the second blow landed. Emily received a legal notice at work. Jason had filed for divorce. She came home pale, gripping the document in her hands. Jason, she began, her voice trembling. What is this? He took a sip of his beer, meeting her gaze with the cold detachment of a man who had already made peace with his decision. It's exactly what it looks like, he said. Her mouth opened, then closed. You don't understand, she whispered. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. No, Emily, I understand perfectly. The panic set in then. She started babbling about mistakes, about regrets, about how things weren't what they seemed. But Jason had heard enough lies to last a lifetime. He stood, walking past her without another word. She reached for his arm, but he pulled away. For the first time, She was the one being left behind. And Jason? He was already moving on. Jason had imagined this moment 100 different ways, but none of them compared to the raw satisfaction of watching Emily's world unravel in real time. He sat in his office, casually flipping through his emails, the divorce papers already in motion. The power balance had shifted, and Emily had no idea just how much she had lost control. The unraveling had already begun. Emily had spent the last 2 days pacing around their home, her phone clutched in her shaking hands, trying to reach Mark, but Mark wasn't answering. He had gone silent after his abrupt termination, his name smeared across corporate emails as an unprofessional risk. Jason had made sure of that. She was frantic now, desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. That evening, Jason sat at the dining table, waiting. He had left the divorce papers in the open, placed carefully where Emily was bound to see them. And sure enough, the moment she stepped into the house, her face was pale, her hands trembling as she held the papers in front of her. "What the hell is this?" Her voice cracked, eyes wide with panic. Jason took a slow sip of his beer before meeting her gaze. "Divorce papers," he said evenly. "Surprised?" Emily's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. You're ending our marriage?" Jason tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Why wouldn't I?" Emily blinked rapidly, struggling to find the right words. "Jason, we can talk about this. I made a mistake." Jason let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, now it's a mistake? That's funny, because when you were sneaking around, lying to my face, whispering sweet little things to Mark over the phone, it sure as hell didn't sound like a mistake." Emily's eyes widened. Her face turned a shade paler. You knew?" Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I knew everything, Emily." He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone and tapping the screen. "Every text, every call, every damn time you walked into that hotel thinking you were getting away with it." Emily staggered backward like he had slapped her. "Jason, please." "Oh, don't beg now." Jason cut her off sharply, his voice cold, detached. "You had months, Emily, to tell me the truth. But you didn't. You lied over and over again. So, forgive me if I'm not exactly interested in whatever excuses you're about to spew." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." Jason slammed his hand down on the table, causing her to flinch. "Bullshit." The word hung between them, thick with finality. Emily's lips trembled. "Jason, we can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can—" Jason stood up abruptly, towering over her. "We?" He let out a sharp chuckle. "There is no we, Emily. There hasn't been for a long time. You made sure of that when you decided I wasn't enough for you." Emily reached for him, but Jason stepped back, his face unreadable. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" he asked, voice eerily calm. "You thought you had control. You thought you were being smart, sneaking around, covering your tracks, but you forgot one thing, Emily." She swallowed hard. "What?" Jason smirked. "I don't lose." The word sent a visible shiver through her. Jason moved past her, heading toward the living room where a laptop sat open. He tapped a few keys, turning the screen toward her. Emily hesitated, stepping closer, and then her breath hitched. There, playing in crystal clear quality, was a video, a recording of her in the hotel room with Mark. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Jason folded his arms, watching her crumble. "That's right, every single moment recorded." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "How do you think Mark's wife felt when she saw?" Emily's eyes snapped up to his in horror. "His wife?" Jason's smirk deepened. "Oh, you didn't know? That's interesting, because she definitely knew about you. She was more than happy to help me expose both of you." Emily staggered back, her entire body shaking. Jason, please. You're done, Emily, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. Your lover? He's gone. His wife is taking him to court, and trust me, you're going to be dragged into that mess. And as for me, he exhaled sharply, I'm done being your fool. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I never wanted this, she whispered. Jason narrowed his eyes. No, you wanted to have it all. You wanted me to be your safety net while you chased whatever thrill Mark gave you. But that's not how life works, Emily. She dropped to her knees, sobbing. Jason, I love you. Jason stared at her for a long moment before shaking his head. No, he said, his voice quieter now. You loved the version of me who never questioned you, the version who trusted you blindly. But that man, he's gone, and you're the one who killed him. Emily clutched her chest, her breathing ragged. Jason didn't wait for her to finish. He walked past her toward the front door, grabbing his keys. Where are you going? She asked desperately. Jason paused, looking back at her one last time. Anywhere but here. And with that he walked out, leaving Emily alone in the wreckage of the life she had so carelessly destroyed. For the first time, she was the one left behind. And Jason? He was finally free. Jason drove through the quiet streets, his grip firm on the wheel, but his mind lighter than it had been in months. The weight of betrayal, of anger, of the lies he had lived with for far too long, it was all unraveling behind him. He didn't look back, not once. The house he had built with Emily, the memories they had shared, it no longer held him captive. She had spent so much time thinking she was in control, playing her game, believing he would always be there as her safety net. But now Jason had flipped the board, and Emily was left to pick up the shattered pieces. He parked in front of his best friend Luke's house. The lights were still on, and Jason barely knocked before the door swung open. Jesus, man, Luke muttered, stepping aside. You look like hell. Jason let out a humorless chuckle. Yeah, well, I've had one hell of a night. Luke shut the door behind them, gesturing toward the living room. Tell me everything. Jason sank into the couch, rubbing a hand over his face before exhaling. She's been cheating for months. Luke's jaw tensed. I had a bad feeling, but I didn't want to say anything. You seemed so sure. So, in love? Jason nodded. I was, and that's exactly why I didn't see it. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. But I found out. I got the proof. And tonight, I ended it. Luke watched him carefully. So, what now? Jason let out a slow breath. Now, I move on. For the first time in a long time, saying that didn't feel like a lie. Meanwhile, back at the house, Emily was drowning in the silence Jason had left behind. She sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the divorce papers, her hands trembling as she reread the words. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Jason was supposed to yell, to cry, to fight for her. But instead, he had walked away without a second glance, and that was worse than any screaming match. It was then that she realized she had never really thought this through. The affair had been thrilling, exciting, an escape from the mundane, but she had never wanted to lose Jason. He was her foundation, her security, the man who had loved her unconditionally. And now he was gone. Her phone vibrated beside her. A desperate flicker of hope sparked in her chest as she snatched it up. Maybe it was Jason, maybe he was reconsidering, maybe... Mark, we need to talk, now. Emily swallowed hard. Mark, the man she had risked everything for. She hesitated, then typed back. Emily, what's going on? The response was almost immediate. Mark, my wife found out everything. She's divorcing me, and she's coming after you too. Emily's heart stopped. Coming after me? Her hands shook as she tried to steady her breathing. Emily, what do you mean? Mark's next message came in rapid-fire text. Mark, she hired a lawyer. She's taking me to court for everything, and she's dragging you into it. There are emails, texts, pictures. Jason worked with her. They planned this together. We've been set up, Emily. We're screwed. Emily's stomach lurched. Jason, this wasn't just a reaction to the affair. This had been calculated. He had been 3 steps ahead of her the entire time. She had underestimated him. And now she was paying the price. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the phone, her mind racing. She wanted to call Jason, to beg him to talk, to fix this. But she knew the moment he walked out that door, he was never coming back. She had gambled, and she had lost. Jason spent the next few weeks rebuilding himself from the ground up. He moved out of the house immediately, letting Emily drown in the empty shell of the life she had shattered. The divorce process was swift. Jason had made sure of that. He got everything. The house, the car, the savings they had built together. Emily, on the other hand, was left picking up the broken pieces, struggling to grasp at whatever life she had left. Mark had disappeared. His wife had followed through with her threats, dragging Emily into legal battles and public humiliation. People talked. Friends distanced themselves. Her career took a hit, and suddenly the world Emily had built, full of secrets and stolen moments, collapsed around her. Jason, however, flourished. He went to the gym more, traveled, focused on work, but most importantly, he found himself again. One evening, while sitting at a cafe, he received a message, a number he hadn't seen in years. Sophie. Hey Jason, it's been a long time. I heard about everything. Hope you're doing okay. Jason stared at the screen, a slow smile tugging at his lip. Sophie, his college ex, the one who had slipped through the cracks before life took them in separate directions. Maybe, just maybe, this was a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, Jason felt something he hadn't in years. And as he sipped his coffee, looking at the message, he realized revenge wasn't just about watching Emily fall. It was about finally rising above her. And he had won. Jason sat on the balcony of his new apartment, the city skyline stretching before him, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. A breeze carried the distant hum of traffic, a comforting reminder that life outside his own had continued, unchanged, unaffected by the wreckage of his marriage. But his life had changed. For weeks, he had lived in the aftermath of the storm. Emily's betrayal, his revenge, the legal battles, the finality of it all. Now, with the divorce settled and Emily fading into a distant memory, Jason found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was free. The realization was a strange one. He had spent so much time caught up in the pain, the anger, the need to take control of the situation, that he hadn't truly thought about what came after. Now, as he sat here, beer in hand, phone buzzing intermittently with messages from friends, colleagues, and even potential dates, he realized something. He had survived. Emily had not. Word had spread fast. In a world where reputations were currency, Emily had gone bankrupt overnight. The affair, the legal battle with Mark's wife, the divorce, she had lost everything. Mutual friends had cut ties. Her once thriving social life had withered. Jason had heard through a colleague that Emily had been forced to move in with her sister, barely scraping by as she tried to rebuild her life. He thought it would bring him more satisfaction, but strangely it didn't. It wasn't because he felt sorry for her, he didn't. She had made her choices, and she had to live with them. But revenge, as satisfying as it had been in the moment, wasn't the thing that healed him. Moving forward did. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. Sophie, dinner tomorrow? No pressure, just 2 old friends catching up? Jason exhaled, smiling to himself. He had spent the last few weeks reconnecting with old friends, and Sophie had been one of the more unexpected surprises. She had always been a what if in his life, someone who had mattered deeply to him once but had slipped away because of timing, distance, and all the things that get in the way of young love. Maybe this was a second chance, not just with Sophie but with himself. Jason had spent so long being the devoted husband, the man who sacrificed, who gave endlessly without questioning whether he was being given the same in return. He had spent so long loving someone who hadn't valued him that he had forgotten what it felt like to love himself. Now he was learning. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't broken. He was just Jason, a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the person you trust the most is the one who will betray you the worst. And when that happens, you have two choices: let it destroy you or let it redefine you. Jason had chosen the latter. He picked up his phone, typed a quick response. Jason, dinner sounds great, looking forward to it. And just like that, he closed the chapter, not with anger, not with regret, but with hope. The best revenge was never about watching Emily fall. It was about watching himself rise. And he had finally won. Jason had finally found peace. Or so he thought. Months had passed since he had walked away from Emily, leaving her to deal with the ruins of her own making. He had moved on, built a new life, and even started seeing Sophie. For the first time in years, he felt like himself again. Until one night, when everything changed. It started with an email. Subject: we need to talk. The sender: Emily. Jason stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the mouse. He had blocked her number weeks ago, cut off all contact. He had no interest in reopening old wounds. But curiosity got the best of him. He clicked. Jason, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but this isn't about the past. It's about something bigger, something you don't know. You think you have the full story, but you don't. And before you delete this, just know, Mark wasn't who you think he was. I wasn't just cheating. I was being played too. Meet me one time, and if you still hate me after that, you'll never hear from me again. Emily. Jason clenched his jaw, his mind screaming at him to close the laptop and move on. But the words lingered. I wasn't just cheating. I was being played too. What the hell did that mean? He debated for hours, pacing his apartment, trying to convince himself that whatever Emily had to say didn't matter. But something about the email felt off, and Jason had never been the type to leave a mystery unsolved. So, against his better judgment, he replied. Where and when? The cafe was quiet when Jason walked in, the dim lighting casting a warm glow over the wooden tables. Emily sat in the back corner, wearing a black coat, her face paler than he remembered. She looked different. Thinner, more tired. When she saw him, her lips parted slightly in what could have been relief or hesitation. Jason, she breathed, standing slowly. Jason didn't bother with pleasantries. He sat down across from her, folding his arms. Talk. Emily swallowed, glancing around as if she expected someone to be watching. Mark wasn't just some guy I had an affair with, she whispered. He was setting me up. Jason scoffed. Yeah? For what? Did he blackmail you into meeting him at that hotel all those times? Emily flinched but shook her head. You don't get it. He was never planning on being with me. He was hired to seduce me. Jason's stomach twisted, but he kept his expression unreadable. Hired? By who? Emily took a deep breath. Your company. Jason felt the words like a slap. He stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, but she didn't. Instead, she reached into her purse and slid a manila folder across the table. Jason hesitated before opening it. Inside were printed emails, conversations between Mark and someone named Dee Reynolds, discussing details of their arrangement. Jason's blood ran cold as he read. Dee Reynolds, we need Jason distracted. Emily is the perfect weak point. Mark, he's a smart guy. What if he finds out? Dee Reynolds, that's why you need to keep her emotionally invested. Make her fall for you. Once she's hooked, he'll be too blind to notice what we're doing on our end. Jason felt the room tilt slightly. This wasn't about Emily. It was about him, his company, his work, everything. His head snapped up. What the hell is this? Emily's eyes were glossy, but she kept her voice steady. You were their real target, Jason. Mark wasn't just some random guy. He was a corporate plant. Jason's mind reeled. His company had been working on a high-profile merger, one that would have given them a major competitive advantage. Had someone used Emily as a distraction to keep him out of the loop? It made sense. All those months of emotional chaos, the affair, the anger, the revenge. He had been too wrapped up in his personal life to notice anything else. And that's exactly what they had counted on. Jason's grip on the papers tightened. Why the hell are you telling me this now? Emily swallowed hard. Because I didn't know, not at first. I thought I was just having an affair. But after everything fell apart, I started putting the pieces together, and then Mark disappeared. Jason frowned. What do you mean, disappeared? I mean, gone. No trace, no social media. His apartment was cleared out overnight. Jason's chest tightened. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was something bigger, more dangerous. And suddenly, Jason realized this wasn't over. Not even close. That night, Jason barely slept. He sat at his desk, staring at the documents Emily had given him, cross-refurrowing every name, every detail. And the more he dug, the more the truth unraveled. His company's stock had dropped significantly after the divorce scandal went public. Investors had pulled out, competitors had swooped in, taking advantage of the chaos. It hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had orchestrated it, and he had played right into their hands. By morning, Jason had made a decision. He wasn't going to let this slide. He had already taken down Emily. Now it was time to take down the people who had used her. Jason spent the next week gathering intel, tracing emails, looking for any connection to Dee Reynolds. Then he found it. A hidden transaction, a wire transfer to Mark from a dummy account, and the signature on the approval? David Reynolds, Senior VP of Mergers and Acquisitions. Jason's blood ran hot. Reynolds was one of his higher-ups, a man he had worked under for years, a man he had trusted, and he had sold Jason out. Jason knew he couldn't confront him outright. He needed to be smart. So he did what he did best. He played the long game. 2 months later, Jason walked into his company's boardroom with a folder of evidence and a calm, deadly smile. He laid out everything: emails, transactions, timestamps, connections between Reynolds and Mark. The board members went pale. By the time Jason finished speaking, Reynolds was sweating bullets. This is a misunderstanding, Reynolds stammered. You can't prove. Jason cut him off. I don't need to prove anything. I already did. He slid another document across the table. It was a resignation letter. Reynolds' name was on it. He looked at Jason, his face red with rage. You set me up. Jason smirked. I learned from the best. Reynolds had no choice. He signed. By the end of the day, the man who had tried to destroy Jason was out. And Jason? He walked away victorious. That night, Jason sat on his balcony, sipping a whiskey, watching the city lights flicker. His phone buzzed. Emily, I heard what you did. I know you didn't do it for me, but thank you. Jason stared at the message for a long moment. Then he deleted it. Emily had been a pawn, but she had still betrayed him. And Jason? He had no interest in looking back, because for the first time he wasn't playing by anyone else's rules. He had won the game, and this time there was no one left to take him down. Jason stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. The cold night air wrapped around him, crisp and refreshing, as he took one last sip of whiskey. It tasted different tonight, less bitter, more like victory. It was over. Emily, Mark Reynolds, the betrayal, the revenge, the lies. He had unraveled every thread, exposed every deceit, and now there was nothing left but silence and peace. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He already knew who it was. Emily had been trying to reach him all day. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted forgiveness. Maybe she just wanted to talk. But Jason had nothing left to say. He pulled the phone from his pocket, stared at the screen for a long moment, then powered it off. No more looking back. No more unfinished business. He was done. As he turned to head inside, a thought crossed his mind. He had spent so much time seeking revenge, proving his strength, reclaiming his power, but now he realized the greatest revenge of all wasn't destroying those who wronged him. It was moving on, truly, completely, without regret. And so Jason did.